Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining me for one of our regular updates from Washington in a busy and almost historic week. I want to get to the global and international issues and the amount of time I've been spending in a classified section as we deal with Israel, Ukraine, and other challenges around the world. But I wanted to highlight at the front end, and it's somewhat amazing to think it was only 3 days ago, but 3 days ago, along with my friend Senator Tim Kaine and Bobby Scott, the governor, and members of the General Assembly, we announced the biggest technology investment ever in Hampton Roads. $300 to $500 million from the Department of Energy to create at Jefferson Labs a high-performance data facility. This will bring supercomputing power to Jeff Labs. Jefferson Labs been around for 40 years, one of our 17 national labs, but it has been somewhat unique in that it's been a single purpose around particle beam acceleration and nuclear physics. Having only a single direction, long-term could have put Jeff Labs' viability in question. The fact that the Department of Energy, on a 4-year process, which going back to the last administration, I've been intimately involved with, making the case that as you think about a location for the whole country to partner with an existing high-performance computing facility out on the West Coast, we needed one east of the Mississippi. And Jefferson Labs, in a very competitive process, was able to get that award, get that designation. The state put up $40 million to build an initial building. People will look back on the announcement on Monday from Hampton Roads and say this was a game changer in terms of the peninsula, Hampton Roads, and the Commonwealth's economy, innovation, and the economic growth that we're already talking about that might surround the Jeff Labs expansion is going to be it's going to be great. I was so proud to be there and finally see this 4+ year project come to culmination. Obviously, lots else going on, and let me make 3 or 4 points before we get to your questions. First, like virtually every American, I have been horrified by the atrocities committed by Hamas against the citizens of Israel. The United States has been the longest supporter of Israel in its 75-year history. We have 2 carrier strike groups, both ported out of Norfolk, who are either in region or on the way to the region. I think it was very appropriate that President Biden went and said, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel against these terrorists. We will support them militarily. And I join in that support with the overwhelming majority of members of both parties in Congress. At the same time, I have enormous empathy for the innocent Palestinian civilians, particularly living in Gaza. I think we need to remember Hamas has been brutal to those Palestinians living in Gaza. In many ways, there have been some speculation that the timing of this attack was because Hamas had become so unpopular, they needed to do something to change the narrative. And I strongly support the humanitarian aid. I'm glad the president put forward $100 million during the trip. We've got to get that crossing at the southern part of Gaza open now so that the water and other relief supplies can get in. It's extraordinarily complicated. It involves Israel, it involves Egypt, but also, whether we like it or not, it involves Hamas, since they control Gaza, and the UN relief group that interacts with Hamas. We have to get the aid in at the same time, making sure weapons are not smuggled in, and the UN group needs to make sure the assistance doesn't fall into the hands of Hamas. My hope is we will see today, or at latest by tomorrow, some of this relief assistance coming in. We'll also, I believe, the administration will either later today or tomorrow announce an emergency supplemental budget package. This is very important. We need to not only, we've already shipped military equipment to Israel, we need to continue to assist our Israeli allies, but at the same time we can't also take our eyes off the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. And I'm amazed that some members here in Congress who are willing to kind of throw aside Ukraine, give Putin a clear win, yet in the same breath they say they're concerned about President Xi and the Communist Party in China. You flunk geopolitics 101 if you don't understand that giving Putin a win gives a green light to Xi in terms of his aspirations for Taiwan and elsewhere. And I believe in this package there'll be assistance for Taiwan as well as assistance on the border, which is also a national crisis and needs additional resources. But let's not forget, while we condemn the awfulness and atrocities committed by Hamas in Israel, we also should not fail to call out the atrocities committed by Russia against the Ukrainian people. And at a moment in time when NATO is being tested and has stepped up in a remarkable way to help Ukraine, it would be a historic mistake if America walked away from that commitment. I believe the overwhelming majority of Democrats and Republicans want to continue that. There is a isolationist group of Republicans who want to desert that. I got to believe that it would make Ronald Reagan literally roll in the grave, someone who stood up so firmly against communism and against Russian or Soviet aggression. But that will be something that will play out as well over the next coming days, and hopefully not too long. We need to get this assistance to Israel, to Ukraine, to the border as soon as possible. So why don't I stop there? And I think it's Lauren. Why don't we go ahead and start these questions?
Senator, our first question will be Tom Fitzgerald with Fox 5. Tom? Okay, we're going to jump to WRIC.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking a couple of minutes. I wanted to ask you about that airstrike on the hospital in Gaza. As you know, partly due to misinformation, that a lot of people are not convinced that Israel wasn't responsible. I know you can't talk about classified information, but would you support the release of some of the information that the intelligence community has so Americans can see what evidence is behind that?
First of all, yes, I would support the intelligence community being as forward-leaning as possible to make sure not only Americans, but the world sees the kind of evidence that I've seen. I mean, Senator Rubio and I'm the chair and he's the vice chair of the intelligence community. We have seen a level of intelligence that candidly virtually no other senator has seen as well. And we have a variety of sources. And I've seen some of the raw intelligence that clearly indicates on the ground that Hamas figures themselves acknowledge that it was not Israel, that it was a separate Palestinian group, not Hamas, but a separate Palestinian group. And in many ways, the fact that the United States and Israel waited to try to get the facts before Hamas, who didn't wait for any facts, but put out for its own purposes the accusation that it was Israel, means that we're chasing that story. The unfortunate circumstance, and we see the violence across the Middle East as our embassies are attacked, is that I think we need to declassify as much information as possible to make Americans and those who seek the truth understand and realize that this was an errant missile from another jihadist group in Gaza. But in this world that we live where, even political figures in America seem to ignore facts, it's a dangerous time. And I think we ought to, again, lean as forward as possible, maybe because it's not going to change the circumstances around this incident at the hospital, which is tragic. And the fact that innocent civilians have been killed is tragic. But recognizing that there's going to be, as Israel takes action against the Hamas leadership, further violence, to try to make sure that we have a rapid response to get the facts out as soon as we know them in as broad a way as possible, I really think has got to be the approach we take.
Senator, our
Thank
next
you,
question. Senator, our next question is Sarah Hammond with 13 News Now.
Hey, Senator Warner, thank you so much for the time. I just wanted to sort of switch gears a little bit, but just get your thoughts on what is going on in the House and the effort to elect a new speaker and sort of the burden that places on the Senate.
Well, I say this kind of glibly, but I've received lots of classified briefings in the last few days about what's going on the ground in Israel. How do we make sure this conflict doesn't extend into Lebanon or in the West Bank? Continued updates on the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Getting good intelligence about what is going to happen out of the House of Representatives. I got no great sources there. My hope is that responsible members of the Republican Party will say this kind of chaos makes no sense. It basically makes our governing structures look foolish in front of Americans, in front of the world. If you don't think this is this kind of dysfunction is being celebrated in Moscow and Beijing, then again, you don't have a basic understanding of geopolitics. So the notional idea that acting Speaker McHenry could be elevated so that the people's business could be done, to me makes a lot of sense. But there's got to be enough of my Republican friends and the Democrats as well to kind of come together and say we need to put in this moment of crisis governing back as the first priority, not this kind of circular firing squad amongst some of the most extreme members of the Republican Party. So I'm hopeful, but again, I say it glibly, but getting intelligence out of what the House so-called leaders want to do, I don't have great sources there. And it seems to me, and I say this as somebody who has got a lot of good friends in the Senate and in the House, Republican members who are equally frustrated. To answer your question specifically, though, let me just make clear, yes, it puts an added burden on us in the Senate to be adults, to act responsibly, to put together this bipartisan plan when the president makes a request for additional security assistance for Israel, for Ukraine, for the border, and if they choose to include Taiwan, we need to do our job.
Senator, our next question will be Coulter Anstett with WTKR.
Senator, thank you for taking the time. I have two questions for you. One, what are your thoughts on the U.S.'s military presence or response so far to the fighting in the Middle East? Do you think it's enough, not enough? What would you ultimately like to see? And then are you concerned that the chaos in the House, specifically the lack of a speaker right now, could impact negatively the U.S.'s ability to respond to the fighting in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, the fact that we've got two carrier strike groups, the Ford and the Eisenhower, either in region or steaming into region, I think that's been an appropriate response. I think it's been a long time since we've had two carrier strike groups in the Eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Israel. That is a powerful signal. It's a powerful signal to make sure that if we have to do additional massive evacuation, or more specifically, to send a really firm warning to the Iranians to not further meddle in the region. I think it's the right response. And again, as I think probably all of you know, both of these carriers are home ported in Norfolk, and our thoughts with those sailors and their family members, many of whom are residents of Virginia. In terms of the House chaos, again, we're in unprecedented territory, but I do not believe that the chaos alone will slow Congress's obligation to get additional supplemental assistance for Israel, Ukraine, the border, and Taiwan. I just got to believe there's enough people over there who realize that is their most basic responsibility, to respond to world crises and not see who can be most obsequious to the former president. That doing your job means voting yes or no. If you want to vote no, you got that right to go back and tell your constituents why you don't think protecting America's standing and our friends around the world. But to simply do nothing is not an option.
Senator, we're going to try Tom Fitzgerald with Box 5 one more time. Tom? Okay, we're going to move on to Amy Knowles with the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. Generally speaking, not as many people turn out to vote on a non-presidential election year. But this year in Virginia, we've got everything from state house and Senate seats to local government spots to school board openings on the ballot. So I wondered if you could talk a little about the impact these changes can make and why it's important to get out to vote.
Well, I think it's really important that everybody got to vote. I'm very proud of the fact that Virginia has gone from one of the states that was the most restrictive on voting to now joining states, red states and blue states, about allowing early voting. And you can vote today. If you don't want to wait till, I believe, November 6th, election day, vote today. There are polling stations open everywhere. Vote this weekend. And in so many ways, the government that you're going to vote for in November at your local level, at your school board, at your constitutional officers, at your state house and state senate, have a direct effect on how all of our 8.5 million Virginians live. In many ways, those votes actually have more effect than sometimes people's votes for president, because this is the government that's closest to you. I obviously believe very strongly that things like protecting a woman's right to choose, continuing to invest in education, making sure that we keep these voting rights are all on the ballot this year. And I hope Virginians will take that into consideration. And let me just add one other thing, Amy. I think this job I've got has been pretty tough the last couple of weeks, but I think the toughest job in Virginia and the toughest job in America today is to be a member of a school board, where we see in certain divisions in Virginia book banning or literally threats of violence against school board members. In many ways, American democracy, the most vivid example is elected school boards, where people in the community, oftentimes without being one party or the other, say they want to step up and make sure their school system works well. Now, coming out of COVID, I don't think, no matter what your position was on COVID, if you were a school board member, you got enormous grief. And one of the things I really worry about is the over-politicization of our school boards. I worry that good people in the community won't want to run for school board because it's a pretty thankless task. But that really is grassroots democracy. So, yes, I hope we all get out and vote. I hope you take advantage of the early voting. And I hope, again, no matter, particularly at least in terms of school board, whether your candidate wins or doesn't win, that we have a lot of respect for that kind of citizen activity and public service.
Senator, our next question is Alexia Stanbridge with WSET.
All right, Alexia here. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we've got you.
All right. So, after the demonstration at the Capitol yesterday, should the government be prosecuting those people?
Oh, if there was violation of rules and laws were broken, of course they should be prosecuted. We live in a land of rule of laws, and laws need to be respected. But if you're trying to make some kind of comparison to people, and if they broke a law, they should be held responsible. But people talking about, arguing about an American foreign policy position, and if you're trying to make some comparison to the insurrectionists who came into the Capitol on January 6th, a day I was here, and sometimes equate that, candidly, you are sadly mistaken.
Senator, our last question will be Joe Thomas with WCHV.
Senator Warner, I appreciate you taking some time out, and boy, I really want to ask you about the phrase book banning, but I had a much more seminal question as chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. You mentioned the connection to China as it relates to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but given what we know about Iran's connection to Hamas, and now Iran is set to join the BRICS economic group on January 1st of 2024. Is there the same concern that this is bigger than just a border skirmish between Hamas and Israel, and that Iran, China, and the rest of the BRICS group are making a play against the West?
Well, first of all, Joe, my hope is, the BRICS also includes Brazil and India. And while they have some economic ties to these other nation states, I know particularly with India, we have very strong ties. But I think let me hit a couple of points. One, you have seen China try to intervene with Iran. You have seen China throw in the past with some of these terrorist organizations. You've seen no condemnation from Russia against the Hamas terrorist actions, or at least I've not seen any to date. And let me be clear, Iran has funded and helped Hamas for years, and the Iranian leadership is awful. But as I think even the most doubtful senators have now came to the same conclusion that I have based upon the intelligence, that the Iranian leadership was actually surprised at the timing and the extent of the Hamas attack against Israel. Doesn't mean that long term we got to stay absolutely aware of Iran. They are anti-American to the extreme. The same can be said of Russia. And as you notice, what's going on as our president goes to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Israeli allies, Putin and Xi were having another meeting, a meeting where I believe they are promoting authoritarian approaches, anti-democratic efforts, and clearly against America and our allies. And let me make one other point that I think is timely. I think it was really strong and a sign of experience when the President of the United States said to Israel, listen, we understand and we felt this kind of grief and pain after 9/11 that you are feeling right now. But to have the maturity that the president had to be able to say, but you know what? Think about this, think about your goals and objectives, because candidly, the United States, greatest power in the world, in the aftermath of 9/11, because we might not have been clear enough that what our goals were beyond taking out the perpetrators of the 9/11 attack. The United States may have overdone in terms of a 20-plus year war in Afghanistan and close to that in Iraq. And I salute the president for having the courage to say that on the world stage. And I believe and I hope our Israeli friends will take that counsel into consideration.
Senator, that was our final question.
Thank you all very much, everybody. Be well.